Same
percentage.
thing with real estate too. Before the market declined, people were having real estate, refinances, or they were selling real estate and splitting the difference, whatever it is, splitting the proceeds. But now, because the market has declined so much, real estate values have gone down. I have clients that are asking me, well, why can't I get my share in accordance to what the value was from 1 year ago? Because it doesn't work that way, because it's going to be the same for your spouse.
Would someone likely say to you, well, it's probably in our best interest to postpone that divorce for another X months because the market's going up or back, or the asset is going, or could the other side of it is, what happens if it's 50-50, but we decide not to sell that asset right now because 50-50 will be worth a lot more, hopefully, a year from now?
We're seeing a lot more of that. People saying, I'd rather have my spouse or myself stay in the house, pay the expenses to do that for a period of time so that we can wait for the market to come back before we sell it. And usually the other side is okay with that because they're going to benefit too. Sometimes some needs money right away, so you may see something different, but we are seeing more and more of postponing the time when people may want to get their money out.
But I should point out too with this is where individuals really need to talk to accountants, because there is an IRS regulation, last time I read it, which said assets divided between husband and wife, it's a non-taxable event if the asset is transferred within 6 years. So there's a time limit on when the asset can be transferred. After 6 years, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, which I don't know. We're not accountants, but at that point I would advise someone to please go and get an advice of a certified public accountant so that they know if there is a wait time, is it going to be a taxable event, or are there some exceptions to that?
So the market as a factor now is driving people not to sell the house right away. What used to do that is in Rhode Island, a deferred sale where there's children who have been in the house and we want to try to keep them there for a period of time longer. Right in the equitable distribution statute, it talks about allowing a deferred sale if in the court's discretion it's in the best interest of the children to keep them in that house for a period of time. So we can do it on that grounds too.
And it's economically feasible.
Economically feasible
for the
parties to keep the house.
Well, certainly we hear now that people will say, we're not happy with each other, but we can't afford to divorce right now. So I understand it's an expensive proposition. Are you finding that, and what is that? What does it cost to become divorced? I know it can be a litigious thing and drag on and be very costly, but what are the basics here?
Sometimes people will come in and they say, well, it's uncontested, so it shouldn't be that expensive. Well, anybody who tells me it's uncontested is probably the same person who's telling me the check is in the mail. Okay. It's very difficult to find an uncontested case. I would look at an uncontested case where someone comes in with a mediated agreement. Okay, and in other words, a mediator, court-approved mediator, has settled the case. There are no children, probably very little assets, and that's it. It's a settled case before it comes in your office. That's uncontested. Lawyers may charge anywhere between $1,500 up to about $3,000 for that uncontested divorce. Filing fees in Rhode Island are $100, so that's part of it. Massachusetts filing fees are $215. Similar, the work is similar in both states. But if it truly isn't uncontested, I would say that's the range. For contested, I'll let David answer that.
I was going to say, as I would with an attorney in any kind of case, I'd want to get a written fee agreement. And I would want to have, if it's going to be a contested matter, most attorneys would say, I'm going to take that case on a contingent, on a retainer where a fee's paid in advance that's put away in an escrow account for the client and billed against on an hourly basis. How far that can go, there are fees in excess of $20,000, $30,000 and more for truly high net worth contested divorces. People can fight over the littlest things and spend a lot of money. The best way to try to preserve your assets from attorney fees is to go through mediation usually. If a case can be mediated, the cost of that's usually shared between the two parties and resolved then putting it through as an uncontested divorce is much less expensive.
And I know we've discussed in previous sessions that you both are mediators, but that is not, that's exclusive from what you're dealing with right now.
Right.
Because if you're mediators, you're
Right.
not lawyers. Now, is it possible for two people who seem to be working together to come to one lawyer, thinking that they will save themselves money and actually say, here it is, we've done what we think is a swell distribution or equitable distribution? Can one lawyer take care of both?
A lawyer cannot represent two parties to the same case. It's an
They have
inherent
adverse
conflict
interests.
of interest.
Yeah, they
It
have
does
adverse
not work.
interests.
So what normally happens in those situations is one party hires the lawyer. That lawyer puts the divorce through for that party. The other party gets divorced too, because if one party is divorced, the other is divorced. That's what you normally might see in a mediated divorce. Again, we talked about this when we talked about mediation. I would recommend to both parties going through mediation to hire an attorney during the process so they know what their rights are as they go through it. And they can either choose then to engage the attorneys for the divorce, or one of them follows through and pays for it. But an attorney cannot represent two parties to the same divorce.
And in fact, we have an obligation to advise the opposing party to seek counsel, seek legal
Right.
advice, because of that very reason.
Who pays for what in the expenses for divorce and what's going on?
Each party generally will pay for their own attorney. However, there is in the statute the right to get attorney's fees under the right circumstance. Again, when a court looks at awarding attorney's fees, it's going to do the equitable distribution process first to see if there's enough money for that other party, the party who might be seeking to have their attorney fees paid for, covered out of the equitable distribution. If there's not enough, then they may order the other side to pay attorney's
And
fees.
it's within the discretion of a judge. You can get counsel fees if it's a post-divorce issue. For instance, if someone's in contempt of, we'll talk about child support. Somebody fails to pay child support, you have something written in your settlement agreement that says if somebody is proven to be in willful contempt, that person is found guilty of willful contempt, and that person is ordered to pay the other individual's counsel fees. So it can be litigated that way. It's still, again, if it's not in your contract, it's within the discretion of the judge. You have a right to seek counsel fees.
We have very little time left to talk about the entire process, but what about same-sex marriages?
Okay. You cannot have same-sex marriages in Rhode Island. As a matter of fact, this week, at this very moment, they're having hearings in the General Assembly about that, whether or not they want to change the law. Also, there was a case in Rhode Island where they couldn't get a same-sex divorce. Don't want to get into all of that. There was a Supreme Court decision that came out about a year ago about that, and the parties who lived in Massachusetts, got married in Massachusetts, then moved to Rhode Island, lived in Rhode Island for a year, the domicile requirement, and then wanted to divorce. The court said no, they couldn't divorce. They had to go back to Mass. They had to go back to Massachusetts.
It was a very technical decision on jurisdiction and what Rhode Island's jurisdiction to hear divorces is.
And you can get a same-sex divorce in Massachusetts. I just want to make sure that people understand that. As long as you live in the state,
residency requirement.
You have that residency requirement.
It seems like that's one of the questions that seems to be coming up too. Now, we have issues to discuss about the process. I think we probably will need to save that for a second, for another installment, and I think there are other issues relative to family law that you wanted to discuss.
Right, family court jurisdiction and what the courts can do.
So first, I would say we want to thank you, attorneys Jackie Grasso and David Bazaar of the law firm Audette, Bazaar, Cordeiro Grasso in East Providence, and they continue to invite your email questions. And as you see on the screen, please email questions to dbazar, B-A-Z-A-R, at abcglawfirm.com. And in those upcoming segments, we'll, cover the process, and we hope you will join us. Thank you for tuning in.